A police dog wouldn't stop barking at him. Old wall, but behind that wall lay a secret buried for 50 years. When his handler finally checked behind it, what they discovered stunned the entire town and cracked open a cold case hidden for decades. This changes everything. That week, the police were assisting at an estate sale in one of the oldest homes in town, a Victorian mansion recently inherited by distant relatives of the original owner. They'd asked for a routine sweep before opening the doors to the public just to be safe. Officers moved room to room with Shadow at their side, expecting nothing more than dust and cobwebs. But in the back study, Shadow suddenly froze. His ears perked, his body stiffened. Then he began, barking loud, sharp, relentless. The room was quiet, filled with old books and furniture covered in sheets. There was no threat, no intruder, but Shadow wouldn't stop. He planted himself in front of the bookshelf and growled, his gaze locked. The handler frowned. Something had triggered him, and it wasn't just old paper. The handler knelt beside Shadow, placing a firm hand on his back. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, but Shadow didn't flinch. His muscles were tight, his ears pushed forward, eyes locked on the old bookshelf, as if it were hiding something alive. Then he began pawing at the bottom shelf, claws scratching against the wood in short, frantic bursts. Dust filled the air, and one of the antique books tumbled to the floor. "Shadow, heel!" the handler commanded again, but the dog refused. His barking grew louder, echoing through the study. Footsteps came running. 2 other officers and the estate's caretaker burst into the room. "What's going on?" one asked. The caretaker, an elderly woman who had inherited the home from a great uncle, looked puzzled. "That bookshelf's been here forever. There's nothing behind it but wall." But Shadow wasn't convinced. He lunged again, growling with increasing intensity. The handler glanced at his team. This isn't just behavior. He's alerting hard. That got their attention. Shadow had been trained on human remains detection, and he had never triggered a false alert. One of the officers stepped forward and ran his hand along the edge of the shelf. It didn't sit flush with the wall. Something was off. Curiosity turned to tension as the officers began to carefully move books off the shelf, one by one. The caretaker stood aside, visibly shaken. "I've never seen that thing moved," she murmured. Shadow paced behind them, eyes darting, ears flicking with every creak. Then one officer noticed it. Scratch marks on the floorboards. The bookshelf hadn't always been still. It had been moved, and recently they pushed it gently. It groaned and shifted. Behind it was a recessed wooden panel. No drywall, no studs, just a thin hollow wall that sounded empty when tapped. One officer pulled out a pocket knife and slid it into the seam. With a soft pop, the panel gave way, revealing a small, dark compartment. Inside was a rusted metal box coated in layers of dust and cobwebs. The air that rushed out carried a strange, stale odor, faint but not forgettable. They carefully pulled the box free and placed it on the desk. The latch was still intact, but brittle. With a soft snap, it opened. Inside were aged photographs, delicate pieces of jewelry, and a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and warped by time. Then they found the final page, and it wasn't just words. It was a confession. The room fell silent as the handler carefully turned the final page of the brittle journal. The handwriting was shaky but legible, scrolled in black ink that had faded with age. At the top was a name, Clara Whitmore, followed by a date, May 17th, 1973. The next line made everyone's breath Catch. No one will ever find her, not as long as this house stands. The officers looked at each other. Clara Whitmore. The name rang a bell. One of the detectives stepped outside to radio the station. Moments later, he returned, pale-faced. Clara Whitmore went missing. 50 years ago. Case went cold. She was never found. The journal detailed a volatile relationship, arguments, threats, jealousy. The writer described Clara's final night, how the shouting got out of hand, how she fell hard and didn't get back up. No mention of a burial site, just guilt and a chilling. Lying. I had to hide the truth where no one would think to look. Then came the photographs. Among them was one that made everyone freeze. Clara, smiling, standing in front of the very fireplace. In the study they were now standing in. Same wallpaper, same lighting, same bookshelf in the background. The box had been locked away for decades, but now, thanks to Shadow's instincts, the truth had clawed its way back to the surface. They didn't know it yet, but the man who had written that journal was still alive, and he was about to be forced to face the secret he thought he buried forever. Detectives wasted no time tracking down the journal's author. The name matched the mansion's original owner, Gerald Whitmore, Clara's fiancé at the time of her disappearance. Now 83, years old and living in a private care facility 2 towns over. He was described by staff as quiet, polite, and alone. When detectives arrived, they found him seated by a window, staring out at nothing. At first, Gerald denied knowing anything about Clara's disappearance. She left me, he muttered, avoiding eye contact. But when they placed the journal in front of him, his hands began to shake. Then came the photo. Clara in his house smiling. His face turned pale. He closed his eyes. She wouldn't stop screaming. He whispered, I lost control. I didn't mean to. He confessed that after Clara died, he panicked. He couldn't go to the police. Instead, he buried her in the basement beneath a slab of concrete. Before the home was renovated and sold, the journal and keepsakes were hidden behind the wall for safekeeping, a cruel form of self-punishment. The officers exchanged looks. Shadow hadn't barked at the journal. He'd been alerting to something deeper, something beneath the very floor they'd been standing on. Even after 5 decades, the dog's nose had picked up lingering. Trace sense of human remains through layers of time and earth. A search warrant was immediately filed. The next day, they would dig right where Gerald said she'd be, and Shadow would lead the way. The basement was dark, its concrete floor cracked in places. The smell of mildew thickened the air. Forensics teams marked the spot Gerald had described. A corner once hidden behind old storage. Shelves now empty and silent. Shadow stood at the edge, his body rigid, nose twitching. As soon as the crew began chipping at the concrete, he let out a single bark, low, sharp, and certain. Hours passed. The dig was slow, careful. Dust filled the air. Then came the sound, a hollow thud. Beneath the concrete lay a shallow cavity filled with dirt. Moments later, a gloved hand pulled back a section of fabric. Bones, a skull, jewelry still resting around a fragile neck. Dental records confirmed the truth. It was Clara. The case, once a mystery that haunted generations, was finally closed. The town held its breath. As the news broke, Gerald Whitmore was formally charged with murder, but his health rapidly declined. He passed away in his sleep just weeks later, never speaking Clara's name again. But justice had been served. Shadow stood quietly during the final sweep, tail still gazed steady. He had done more than detect a scent.